Her small hands pressed against his chest as his world went dark, and when Theodore Blackwood opened his eyes to see the face of his savior, he whispered the one word that would change everything: Zara. Now settle in. Let's dive right into the story. Before the story unfolds, wherever life has led you, know this story was written with you in mind.
If you're ready for the full story, make sure to hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. Tomorrow, I've got another jaw-dropping story lined up, packed with twists you won't want to miss.
But that moment was still 3 hours away. The subway platform at 125th Street smelled like rain and regret at 6:47 a.m. Zara Williams pressed her back against the cold tile wall, watching the early commuters rush past like they were running from something, or toward something that mattered more than the skinny black girl counting quarters in her palm. 14 years old, and she'd learned to make herself invisible. It was easier that way. Easier than explaining why her school uniform was wrinkled from sleeping in it, why her sneakers had more holes than sole, why she carried everything she owned in a backpack that had seen better decades. "Excuse me, sweetie." An older woman with kind eyes and a nurse's badge stopped in front of her. "You okay? You look." "I'm fine." Zara's voice came out smaller than she intended. She straightened her shoulders, trying to look older, more certain. "Just waiting for the train." The woman hesitated, clearly seeing through the lie, but the approaching rumble of the downtown express made her glance toward the tracks. "Well, be safe, okay?" Zara nodded, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As the woman disappeared into the crowd, Zara looked down at the coins in her palm again. $2.37. Enough for a subway ride to nowhere in particular, which was exactly where she was headed. The group home had been her third this year. Mrs. Patterson meant well, but when you've got 12 kids and a budget that barely covers ramen noodles, one more mouth to feed starts looking like a problem instead of a person. Zara had heard the hushed phone conversations, seen the way Mrs. Patterson's face creased when she thought no one was looking. "We just can't," had been the beginning of so many conversations that ended with Zara packing her life into a backpack. But today felt different. Today, she wasn't running from a bad situation toward an unknown one. Today, she was choosing her own path, even if she had no idea where it led. The train arrived with a screech of metal and a rush of stale air. Zara stepped aboard, finding a seat near the back where she could watch everyone without being watched. The car was already half full with the morning rush, construction workers heading to job sites, office workers clutching coffee like lifelines, teenagers her age who actually had somewhere to be. What would it feel like, she wondered, to wake up in the same bed every morning? To know someone was making breakfast, asking about homework, caring if you made it home safe? The train lurched forward, and Zara pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the city blur past. She'd been in foster care since she was 8, but the memories of her mother were still sharp enough to cut. Mama's laugh that filled up their tiny apartment. The way she'd hum while braiding Zara's hair. The promise she'd made the night before the accident. "We're gonna be okay, baby girl. We're gonna be just fine." 6 years later, Zara was still waiting for that promise to come true. 23 floors above the chaos of Manhattan, Theodore Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, looking down at the city like a king surveying his kingdom. At 52, he built an empire that had made him one of the wealthiest men in New York. Blackwood Industries had holdings in everything from real estate to technology, and Theodore's Midas touch had turned every investment into gold. But gold, he'd learned, was cold comfort when you had no one to share it with. His reflection in the window showed a man who'd forgotten how to smile. Silver hair perfectly styled, suit tailored to hide the softness that came from too many business dinners and not enough sleep. His eyes, once bright with ambition, had dulled to the color of winter storms. "Mr. Blackwood." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 9 a.m. is here." Theodore didn't turn around. "Cancel it." "Sir, this is the Henderson account. They've been waiting 3 weeks for this meeting." "I said cancel it." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Cancel everything today. I'm not feeling well." It wasn't exactly a lie. Theodore hadn't felt well in 3 years. Not since that Tuesday morning when Detective Martinez had called to tell him they were closing the case. "No new leads, Mr. Blackwood. I'm sorry. Sometimes people just disappear." His daughter, Zara, had been 11 when she'd vanished from the park 6 blocks from their home. One moment she was on the swings, her laughter carrying on the spring breeze. The next she was gone, leaving behind only a small bracelet and a hole in Theodore's chest that had never healed. He'd spent millions on private investigators, rewards, search teams. He'd appeared on television, pleading with anyone who might have seen her. He'd followed every lead, chased every shadow, held onto every false hope until hope itself became a luxury he couldn't afford. After a year of searching, then 2, then 3, Theodore had done what he did best. He built walls. Walls around his heart, around his life, around the part of himself that had once believed in love and family and the possibility of happiness. The penthouse was a monument to his success and his isolation. Marble floors that echoed with emptiness. Artwork worth more than most people's homes. A kitchen that had never seen a family dinner. Bedrooms that had never heard children's laughter. Theodore moved to his desk, where a single framed photo sat among the business reports and financial statements. Zara at 10, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a drawing she'd made of the two of them. Stick figures with huge smiles, standing in front of a house with a sun shining overhead and, "I love you, Daddy," written in purple crayon. His chest tightened the way it did every morning when he looked at the photo, every evening when he said goodnight to an empty house, every moment when he remembered that love was something that could be stolen in an instant. The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Blackwood? Are you sure about the Henderson meeting? They're saying I'm leaving." Theodore's voice was flat, emotionless. "If anyone needs me, they can wait." He grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator, not sure where he was going but knowing he couldn't stay. Sometimes the walls felt too close, the silence too loud. Sometimes he needed to move, to breathe, to pretend for a few hours that he was still human. The elevator descended past floors of employees who knew him only as a name on their paychecks, past the lobby where security guards nodded respectfully at a man they'd never seen smile, past the garage where his driver waited by a car that had never heard children's voices. "Where to, Mr. Blackwood?" Theodore paused at the car door, looking out at the street where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. "I'll take the subway." His driver's eyebrows rose slightly. In 5 years of employment, Theodore had never once taken public transportation. "Sir." "The subway," Theodore repeated, already walking away. "I need to remember what it feels like to be human." What do you think happens when two people from completely different worlds are brought together by fate? Have you ever helped a stranger without expecting anything in return? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The downtown 6 train was packed tighter than Theodore remembered public transportation could be. Bodies pressed against bodies, the air thick with the scent of coffee, perfume, and the indefinable smell of humanity in motion. He found himself wedged between a construction worker reading a Spanish newspaper and a young mother trying to keep her toddler from grabbing strangers. Theodore's chest felt tight, but he attributed it to the crowd, the unfamiliar sensation of being surrounded by people who didn't know his name or care about his bank account. For the first time in years, he was anonymous, just another face in the morning rush. 3 seats away, Zara sat with her backpack clutched in her lap, watching the passengers with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read people for survival. She noticed things others missed, the way the businessman kept checking his phone with shaking hands, the exhaustion in the cleaning lady's eyes, the gentle way an elderly man helped his wife navigate the crowded car. And she noticed the well-dressed man standing near the doors, his face pale and drawn, one hand pressed almost unconsciously to his chest. The train lurched around a curve, and Theodore stumbled slightly, his breath coming shorter. The tightness in his chest wasn't from the crowd anymore, it was something else, something that made his left arm tingle and his vision blur at the edges. Not now, he thought desperately. Not here. But his body had other plans. The crushing pain hit like a freight train, radiating from his chest down his arm and up into his jaw. Theodore's knees buckled, and he grabbed for the nearest pole, his expensive watch catching the fluorescent light as his hand trembled. The woman next to him stepped back instinctively, creating space but also distance. The construction worker looked up from his paper but seemed unsure whether to intervene. In a city of 8 million people, Theodore Blackwood was dying alone in a crowd. That's when Zara moved. She was small enough to slip through the packed bodies, quick enough to reach him before he hit the floor. Her hands, calloused from years of doing things for herself, warm from youth and determination, pressed against his shoulders as he sagged. Hey, it's okay, she said, her voice cutting through the train's noise and his panic. I got you. Just breathe. Theodore's eyes found hers, and for a moment, the pain receded under the intensity of her gaze. Brown eyes, deep and familiar in a way that made his heart stutter for reasons beyond the attack. There was something about her face, the shape of her nose, the determined set of her jaw. Someone call 911. Zara shouted over her shoulder, never taking her eyes off Theodore. This man's having a heart attack. The train car erupted in motion. Phones appeared, voices called out medical advice. Someone up front was telling the conductor to stop at the next station. But Zara's world had narrowed to the man in her arms, this stranger who looked at her like he'd seen a ghost. "What's your name?" she asked, her hand steady against his chest. She could feel his heart racing, irregular and desperate. "Theodore," he managed, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay, Theodore. I'm Zara. You're gonna be fine, you hear me? Just keep looking at me." The name hit him like a second wave of pain, but this one was purely emotional. Zara. His daughter's name, spoken by a girl who couldn't be much older than his Zara would be now, if she were alive. "How old are you?" The question came out hoarse, urgent. 14, she said, confusion flickering across her features. "But that doesn't matter right now. Just focus on breathing." 14. The same age his daughter would be. Theodore's vision swam, but not from the heart attack. This girl, this beautiful brave girl who'd rushed to help a stranger without hesitation, she was everything he'd hoped his own daughter would become. The train screeched to a halt at 86th Street, and suddenly the car was full of paramedics, their calm efficiency taking over from Zara's desperate care. But as they worked to stabilize Theodore, his eyes never left her face. "You saved his life," one of the EMTs told Zara as they prepared to move Theodore to a stretcher. Quick thinking, keeping him calm like that. Zara stepped back as the professionals took over, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She watched them work, this man who'd looked at her like she was the most important person in the world, even while his body was shutting down. "Wait," Theodore called out as they lifted the stretcher. His voice was stronger now, the oxygen and medication working their magic. "The girl, Zara, is she?" "I'm here," she said, moving closer to the stretcher. The other passengers were filing off the train now, the drama over, their own lives calling them back to routine. Theodore reached out with his free hand, the one not connected to 4 lines and monitors. Zara hesitated for just a moment before taking it. His skin was cold, but his grip was firm, desperate. "Thank you," he whispered, and there were tears in his eyes that had nothing to do with physical pain. You remind me of someone." "Yeah." Zara's voice was soft, curious. "Someone good, I hope." "The best," Theodore said, his voice breaking. "The very best person I ever knew." The paramedics were moving now, wheeling him toward the ambulance, but Theodore held onto her hand until the last possible moment. "Will you?" he started, then stopped, seeming to realize how strange the request might sound. "Will you come with me? To the hospital? I don't have anyone else." The admission hung in the air between them. This man, clearly wealthy enough to afford the best of everything, had no one to call in his moment of crisis. No family rushing to his bedside, no friends worried about his condition. Zara looked at the paramedics, then back at Theodore. She thought about the group home she'd left, the uncertain future that waited for her, the fact that no one would miss her if she didn't show up anywhere. But mostly she thought about the way he'd looked at her, like she mattered. Like she was worth something. "Okay," she said simply. "I'll come." The relief that washed over Theodore's face was almost as dramatic as the medical emergency had been. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Zara climbed in beside him, her backpack clutched in her lap and her heart beating almost as fast as his. Neither of them spoke during the ride to Mount Sinai, but Theodore's eyes never left her face. There was something happening here, something bigger than a chance encounter on a subway train. Something that felt like destiny. In the harsh light of the ambulance, with monitors beeping and the city rushing past outside, two broken people sat in silence and wondered if maybe, just maybe, they'd found exactly what they'd been searching for. Zara squeezed Theodore's hand as they pulled into the hospital, and for the first time in 3 years, Theodore Blackwood remembered what hope felt like. The emergency room at Mount Sinai buzzed with controlled chaos, nurses and scrubs moving with practiced efficiency, the constant beep of monitors, families clustered in uncomfortable plastic chairs waiting for news that could change everything. Zara sat in the corner of the cardiac wing waiting area, her backpack at her feet, feeling completely out of place among the worried relatives and expensive flower arrangements. It had been 2 hours since the ambulance doors had closed behind Theodore's stretcher. 2 hours since a nurse had handed her a visitor's badge and pointed toward the waiting area with a smile that didn't quite hide her confusion about why a homeless-looking teenager was the emergency contact for a man whose insurance information included words like platinum and executive. Zara Williams. A doctor in scrubs approached, his face kind but tired. "I'm Dr. Patel. You came in with Mr. Blackwood." She nodded, suddenly aware of how young she must look, how out of place. "Is he okay?" "He's stable. Mild heart attack, brought on by what looks like prolonged stress and anxiety. We've got him on medication, and he should make a full recovery." Dr. Patel paused, studying her face. "He's been asking for you. Are you family?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Family. The word Zara had been chasing her whole life, the thing she'd never quite managed to hold on to. "No," she said quietly. "Just someone who was there." Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "Well, just someone who was there saved his life. His heart rhythm was dangerously irregular when you found him. A few more minutes and..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "Can I see him?" "Room 314. But visiting hours end at 8, and hospital policy." "I understand." Zara was already standing, shouldering her backpack. She'd learned not to expect special treatment, not to push when adults started talking about policies and rules. Room 314 was private, expensive, with a view of Central Park that probably cost more per night than most people's rent. Theodore lay propped up against white pillows, connected to machines that monitored every beat of his healing heart. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in a way that his expensive suit had hidden. His eyes opened when she knocked softly on the doorframe. "Zara." Relief flooded his voice. "I was afraid you'd left." She stepped into the room but stayed near the door, unsure of her welcome now that the crisis had passed. "How are you feeling?" "Like an idiot," Theodore said, attempting a smile. 52 years old and I nearly die on a subway train. My board of directors would have a field day if they knew." "Board of directors?" Zara moved closer, curious despite herself. "I run a company. Blackwood Industries." He watched her face for recognition, but saw only polite interest. It was refreshing, actually, to meet someone who didn't know his net worth before they knew his name. That sounds important. It used to feel important. Theodore's voice was quiet. "Before I remembered what actually matters." There was something in his tone that made Zara study his face more carefully. The expensive clothes, the private room, the way the nurses spoke to him with deference. This man had everything money could buy. So why did he look so lonely? You said I reminded you of someone, she said, settling into the visitor's chair. Who? Theodore's face changed, grief replacing the moment of lightness. My daughter. She would be about your age now. Would be. She's been missing for 3 years. The words came out flat, matter of fact, but Zara could see the pain behind them. Taken from a park 6 blocks from our house. The police they think she's probably dead. The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared understanding of loss. Zara knew that kind of grief, the way it carved out spaces inside you that never quite healed. I'm sorry, she said simply. Her name was Zara too. The words hit like a physical blow. Zara felt her breath catch, her heart race for reasons she couldn't quite name. It was a coincidence, had to be. Zara wasn't an uncommon name, was it? But the way Theodore looked at her, like he was seeing a ghost. That's why you asked me to come with you, she said, understanding dawning. I look like her. Theodore's silence was answer enough. Anger flashed through Zara, hot and sharp. She'd spent her whole life being a substitute for someone else's lost family. Foster parents who took her in hoping to fill a hole left by their own children. Social workers who saw her as just another case file. Strangers who helped her because she reminded them of their daughters or sisters or younger selves. I should go. She stood abruptly, reaching for her backpack. Wait. Theodore's voice was urgent. Please, I didn't mean. You didn't mean what? To use me as a replacement for your dead daughter. The words came out harsher than she intended, but the hurt was real and raw. I've been someone's substitute my whole life, Mr. Blackwood. I thought maybe this time. This time what? I thought maybe someone saw me. Just me. Not who I reminded them of or who they wished I could be. Tears threatened, but Zara had learned long ago not to cry in front of strangers. I thought maybe I mattered. You do matter. Theodore's voice was fierce, desperate. You saved my life, Zara. You didn't have to. You could have walked away, let someone else deal with the crazy rich man having a heart attack on the subway. But you stayed. You held my hand. You made me feel less alone. Because I look like her. No. Theodore struggled to sit up straighter, his heart monitor beeping faster. Because of who you are. The girl who saw a stranger in pain and didn't hesitate to help. The girl brave enough to ride in an ambulance with someone she'd never met. The girl who's been taking care of herself for God knows how long and still has room in her heart to care about others. Zara paused at the door, her hand on the handle. You don't know anything about me. Then tell me. Theodore's voice broke slightly. Please. I know I have no right to ask, but when's the last time someone asked you to stay? The question hit deeper than Zara expected. When was the last time? She couldn't remember. People were always asking her to leave, to move on, to find somewhere else to be. Even the kindest foster parents eventually started talking about better placements and what's best for everyone. Why? She asked, not turning around. Because I've spent 3 years learning how to be alone, and in one morning you reminded me what it feels like to be human. Because when I looked into your eyes on that train, I saw something I'd forgotten existed. What's that? Hope. Zara turned back to face him, studying his expression for signs of manipulation or false sentiment. But all she saw was genuine emotion, raw and unguarded. I can't be her, she said quietly. I can't be your daughter. I'm not asking you to be. Theodore's voice was steady now, honest. I'm asking you to be yourself. And maybe we can figure out what that means together. The machines beeped steadily in the silence that followed. Outside the window, Central Park stretched out in the afternoon sun, full of people living their lives, making their choices, taking their chances on connection. "The visiting hours end at 8, Zara said finally. "I know. And I don't have anywhere else to go." "I know that too." She moved back to the chair, setting her backpack down with the careful precision of someone making a decision that might change everything. "Okay," she said. "But I'm not staying because you're rich or because you think I'm someone else. I'm staying because," she paused, searching for the right words. "Because when you looked at me on that train, you didn't see a problem to be solved. You saw a person worth saving too." Theodore smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Deal." But even as they settled into an easier silence, both of them wrestled with their own fears. Theodore fought the voice in his head that said this was crazy, that he was a 52-year-old man with no business getting attached to a homeless teenager just because she shared his daughter's name. And Zara battled the familiar terror of hoping for something that might disappear without warning. Neither of them spoke about the elephant in the room. What would happen when the hospital discharged him, when visiting hours ended, when the real world intruded on this fragile connection they'd built over shared trauma and desperate need? For now, it was enough to sit in the same room and remember what it felt like to matter to someone else. But resistance was building in both their hearts, and they could feel it. The hospital discharge process took 3 hours and 17 minutes. Theodore knew because he'd been watching the clock on the wall, dreading the moment when he'd have to walk out those doors and figure out what came next. Dr. Patel had been clear: complete rest for at least a week, no stress, regular medication, and someone to monitor him for any signs of complications. The problem was, Theodore realized as he signed form after form, he didn't have someone. His housekeeper came twice a week. His driver was an employee, not a caregiver. The closest thing he had to family was his lawyer, and that felt particularly pathetic at 52 years old. Zara had spent the morning in his room, quietly reading a battered paperback she'd pulled from her backpack, something called The House on Mango Street, that looked like it had been through several owners. She'd answered his attempts at conversation with careful politeness, but he could see her building walls, preparing to disappear back into whatever life she'd been living before their collision on the 6 train. "Mr. Blackwood." A nurse appeared with a wheelchair and a clipboard. "Ready to go home?" Home. The word felt hollow. Theodore looked at Zara, who was carefully not meeting his eyes as she packed her book away. "Actually," he heard himself say, "I have a question about the discharge instructions. It says I need someone to stay with me for the first 48 hours. What if I don't have anyone?" The nurse frowned. "Family member? Friend? We can't release you without proper care arrangements." "I could stay." The words came out so quietly Theodore almost missed them. Zara was looking at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, if you need someone to make sure you don't, die or whatever." The nurse looked between them, clearly confused by the dynamic, but professionally obligated to find a solution. "Are you family?" Theodore paused, the lie balanced on his tongue. Legal guardianship, adoption, family, none of it was true, but in that moment, sitting in a hospital room with a girl who'd risked everything to save a stranger, it felt more real than any relationship he'd had in years. "She's staying with me. Temporarily. I'll need emergency contact information for both of you," the nurse said, making notes on her clipboard. Zara shot Theodore a look that was equal parts grateful and terrified. They were crossing a line here, moving from chance encounter to something more intentional, more dangerous. Two people with nothing to lose suddenly had something at stake. The ride to Theodore's penthouse was silent except for the soft classical music playing through the town car speakers. Zara pressed her face to the window, watching Manhattan change from crowded streets to tree-lined avenues, from small apartments to buildings with doormen who wore actual uniforms. "You live here?" she asked as they pulled up to a building that looked like it belonged in a movie about rich people. 42nd floor, Theodore said, then immediately regretted it. He sounded like he was bragging, which wasn't his intention. Or maybe it was. Maybe he wanted to impress this girl who'd seen him at his most vulnerable. The doorman, James, who'd worked the building for 15 years, did a double-take when he saw Zara climb out of the car behind Theodore. His professional smile never wavered, but Theodore caught the quick assessment. Expensive suit and teenage girl with a backpack, hospital bracelet still on his wrist, something that didn't quite add up. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood. I hope you're feeling better, sir." "Much, thank you." Theodore's hand found Zara's shoulder, a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "This is Zara. She'll be staying with me for a few days." "Of course, sir. Should I have building security add her to the approved visitor list?" "Permanent resident list," Theodore corrected, surprising himself. "Full access." In the elevator, Zara stared at the buttons. So many floors, so much space above the city. "How do you not get lonely?" she asked. The question hit harder than Theodore expected. "You learn to prefer the quiet." That's not the same thing. No, it wasn't. But it was easier than admitting that he'd spent 3 years building a fortress around his heart, filling his life with noise and work and meaningless meetings to avoid the silence where grief lived. The elevator opened directly into Theodore's penthouse, and Zara stepped into a world she'd only seen in magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park. Artwork that looked museum quality hung on walls painted in colors that probably had names like Whispered Taupe and Essential Cream. Everything was perfect, expensive, and utterly without personality. "Jesus," Zara breathed, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry. This is where you live." "This is where I stay," Theodore said, and realized there was a difference. Zara walked to the windows, her reflection ghost-like against the city lights. "How many bedrooms?" "4. "How many people live here?" 1. She turned to look at him, and Theodore saw something in her expression he couldn't quite name. Not judgment, exactly, but a kind of sad understanding. "You must really miss her," Zara said softly. Theodore joined her at the window, the two of them standing side by side looking out at a city full of lights and lives and families having dinner together. "Every day," he admitted. "But after a while, missing someone becomes like breathing. You don't think about it, you just do it. Until you can't breathe at all." "Yeah." They stood in silence for a moment, two people who understood loss in ways they wished they didn't. "Are you hungry?" Theodore asked, suddenly aware that he hadn't eaten since yesterday, and she probably hadn't eaten in longer than that. "I don't want to be trouble." "You're not trouble." The words came out fiercer than he intended. "You saved my life, Zara. The least I can do is make sure you don't starve in my living room." The kitchen was a monument to unused potential, top-of-the-line appliances that still had their manual booklets, a refrigerator that contained mostly takeout containers and expensive water. Theodore opened cabinets, increasingly embarrassed by how little actual food he had. "I could make pasta," Zara offered, peering over his shoulder. "If you have noodles and anything to put on them." "You cook." "Foster care teaches you to make something out of nothing." She was already pulling items from his sparse pantry, a box of linguine that had been there for months, a jar of marinara sauce, some garlic that was probably still good. "Besides, you're supposed to be resting. Doctor's orders." Watching Zara move around his kitchen was surreal. She worked with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to be self-sufficient, but there was something else, a carefulness, like she was afraid of breaking something or taking up too much space. "You can use whatever you want," Theodore said, settling onto a bar stool at the kitchen island. This is your home too. For now." Zara paused in her pasta making, sauce spoon suspended in midair. "Home." The word hung between them, loaded with hope and fear and the weight of promises that had been broken before. "I mean," Theodore backtracked, "while you're here. While I'm recovering. I just meant." "I know what you meant." Zara's voice was quiet. "I just haven't heard that word in a while." "How long have you been on your own?" "Officially?" 3 days. Unofficially. She shrugged, stirring the sauce with more attention than it needed. A long time. Theodore wanted to ask more, about the group home, about her family, about how a 14-year-old girl ended up alone in the world. But he recognized the careful way she held herself, the practiced deflection. He'd built his own walls. He knew what they looked like. Well, he said instead, I'm glad you're here. And surprisingly, he meant it. For the first time in 3 years, his penthouse felt less like a mausoleum and more like a place where people actually lived. They ate dinner at his dining room table, a massive piece of furniture that seated 12 and had never hosted more than business meetings. Zara's pasta was simple but perfect, and Theodore realized he hadn't tasted food this good since before. Since when he actually paid attention to flavors instead of just consuming fuel. This is really good, he said. My mom taught me. Zara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Before she died. How old were you? 8. 8 years old, and she'd been taking care of herself ever since. Theodore's chest tightened, but not from heart problems this time. I'm sorry, he said. Yeah, well. Zara twisted pasta around her fork with practiced precision. People leave. It's what they do. Not everyone. She looked up at him then, brown eyes serious and older than they should be. Everyone I've ever cared about. The statement sat between them like a challenge. Theodore realized they were both walking into dangerous territory. Two people who'd learned not to count on anyone suddenly dependent on each other for reasons neither of them fully understood. After dinner, Theodore showed Zara to one of the guest rooms. It was decorated in what his interior designer had called sophisticated neutrals, beiges and creams, and absolutely nothing that suggested a human being had ever actually slept there. There are towels in the bathroom, he said, suddenly awkward. And if you need anything. I won't. Zara stood in the doorway, her backpack looking small and out of place against the expensive furniture. I mean, thank you. For letting me stay. But I won't be any trouble. Zara. Theodore turned back to face her. You don't have to earn your place here. You don't have to be perfect or quiet or invisible. You can just be. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. People say that. But they don't really mean it. I mean it. How do I know that? It was a fair question, and Theodore didn't have a good answer. How do you prove to someone who's been abandoned over and over that this time might be different? How do you promise safety to someone who's learned that safety is temporary at best? I guess you don't, he said finally. I guess we both just have to take a chance. That night, Theodore lay in his king-sized bed listening to the sounds of someone else in his home. Water running in the guest bathroom. Footsteps on hardwood floors. The soft click of a door closing. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't alone with his grief. And for the first time in 6 years, Zara fell asleep in a bed where she didn't have to wonder if she'd still be welcome in the morning. Neither of them slept well. Too much uncertainty, too much risk, too much hope they were afraid to acknowledge. But they were together, bound by circumstance and need and the fragile beginning of something that might, if they were very careful and very lucky, become trust. Have you ever had to depend on a stranger's kindness when you had nowhere else to turn? What does home really mean to you? Share your thoughts about taking chances on people below. The nightmare came at 3:17 a.m., shattering the careful quiet of Theodore's penthouse like glass against marble. Zara's scream tore through the walls, raw and desperate, pulling Theodore from his first peaceful sleep in months. He found her in the guest room, tangled in expensive sheets that had become a prison, her body rigid with terror even as her eyes remained closed. Tears streamed down her face as she fought invisible demons, her voice broken and small. Mama, please don't leave me. Please, I'll be good. I promise I'll be good. Theodore's heart fractured. He'd heard those same words, that same desperate bargaining with fate, in his own voice 3 years ago when the police had first told him Zara was missing. The universal language of a child abandoned by forces beyond their control. Zara. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, not touching but close enough that his voice might penetrate the dream. You're safe. You're here with me. Her eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused, scanning the unfamiliar room with a quick assessment of someone always ready to run. It took a moment for recognition to settle in, for her breathing to slow from panic to simple fear. Sorry, she whispered, sitting up and pushing her hair back with shaking hands. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. Don't apologize. Theodore reached for the bedside lamp, filling the room with soft light. Bad dream. Zara laughed, but there was no humor in it. More like a memory. She looked so young in the oversized t-shirt she'd borrowed from his closet, her face puffy from sleep and tears. But her eyes held the kind of knowledge that came from surviving things no child should face. Want to talk about it? Not really. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself small. Just the usual stuff. Car accidents. Hospitals. Foster homes. The greatest hits of a screwed-up childhood. Theodore waited, recognizing the deflection for what it was. In his experience, the most important truths always started with someone claiming they didn't want to share them. The accident, Zara said finally, her voice barely audible. I was in the car when it happened. When my mom died. The words hung in the darkness between them. Theodore felt his chest tighten, not the physical pain from yesterday, but the deeper ache of recognizing grief in someone else. I was 8. We were coming home from the grocery store, and this drunk driver, she shook her head. Mama died on impact. I was trapped in the back seat for 2 hours before they could cut me out. I kept calling for her, but she wouldn't answer. Jesus, Zara. The social worker said I was lucky to survive. Lucky. She laughed again, that bitter sound that belonged to someone much older. Spent 6 months in the hospital, then got shuffled into the system. 14 different placements in 6 years. Some were okay. Some were not. Theodore's hands clenched into fists. He'd spent 3 years imagining the worst for his own daughter, but hearing about what Zara had actually endured made his protective instincts flare white-hot. Where did you get this? He asked gently, noticing for the first time a thin silver bracelet on her wrist. Even in the lamplight, he could see it was old, tarnished, with something engraved on it. Zara's hand moved protectively to cover the bracelet. It was my mom's. Only thing I have left of her. May I see it? She hesitated, then slowly extended her arm. Theodore leaned closer, squinting at the tiny engraving. The letters were worn smooth by years of nervous fidgeting, but he could just make out, ZB forever loved. ZB, he read aloud. Zara, what's your last name? Williams. Well, that's my foster name. Officially. But my real name, she paused, studying his face with sudden intensity. My real name is Zara Blackwood. The world stopped. Theodore's vision grayed at the edges, his carefully repaired heart skipping beats that had nothing to do with medical conditions. The bracelet slipped from his fingers as he stared at the girl sitting in his guest bed, the girl who'd saved his life, the girl who'd been living on the streets while he searched the world for her. That's impossible, he whispered. But even as he said it, he was seeing things he'd missed before. The shape of her nose, exactly like his late wife Catherine's. The stubborn set of her jaw when she was determined about something. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking, a gesture so familiar it hurt. My mom's name was Catherine Blackwood, Zara continued, her voice growing smaller as she saw the shock on Theodore's face. She said my father was a rich man who couldn't take care of us. She never told me his name, but I always wondered. Theodore's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone, scrolling to the photo he kept there. Catherine at the hospital the day Zara was born, exhausted and beautiful and holding their daughter like she was made of starlight. He turned the phone toward Zara, and watched her face crumble as she recognized the woman in the picture. Mama, she breathed, reaching for the phone with trembling fingers. But that means your father. The words came out broken, barely a whisper. Oh God, Zara. You're my daughter. You're alive. You're here. The silence that followed was deafening. Theodore watched his daughter, alive and real and sitting 3 feet away from him, process the magnitude of what they'd just discovered. You left us. Her voice was flat, emotionless in a way that was somehow worse than anger would have been. No, You left us, she repeated, louder now. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep our apartment. She was exhausted all the time, stressed about money, about raising me alone. And you were here, living in this palace while we struggled to pay for groceries. Theodore felt like he was drowning. Zara, I didn't know. Your mother never told me she was pregnant. We had a relationship, yes, but it was brief, and when it ended, she disappeared. I tried to find her, but... Bullshit. Zara was on her feet now, pacing the room like a caged animal. Rich men like you don't lose track of people unless they want to. That's not true. She died because she couldn't afford the safer car. She worked herself into exhaustion because she was raising your child alone. And where were you? Building your empire, getting richer while your daughter grew up in foster care. Each word hit Theodore like a physical blow. The guilt he'd carried over his missing daughter was nothing compared to this. The realization that she'd been suffering while he'd been successful, struggling while he'd been comfortable. I searched for you, he said desperately. After Catherine died, when you went missing from that park. Missing. Zara stopped pacing. I wasn't missing. I was right there in the system. Zara Blackwood, ward of the state, bouncing between homes because nobody wanted a traumatized 8-year-old. The social worker said you'd been adopted, that your records were sealed for privacy. I was never adopted. Zara's laugh was hollow. Nobody wanted me permanently. I was just a temporary inconvenience in a dozen different houses. Theodore felt the world shifting beneath him, everything he believed about his daughter's disappearance crumbling. The private investigators, the police searches, the sleepless nights wondering if she was alive, all of it based on wrong information, bureaucratic mistakes, a system that had failed them both. I would have taken you, he said, his voice breaking. If I'd known you existed, if I'd known Catherine had died, I would have moved heaven and earth to bring you home. Would you? Zara's eyes blazed with years of accumulated hurt. Or would I have been an inconvenience? A reminder of a relationship you'd rather forget? You could never be an inconvenience. You're my daughter. I stopped being your daughter the day you walked away from my mother. The words hit like a slap. Theodore saw himself through her eyes, a rich man who'd abandoned a pregnant woman, who'd lived in luxury while his child suffered, who'd found her by accident rather than by searching in the right places. Zara, please. Don't. She backed toward the door, her body coiled for flight. Don't call me that. Don't call me your daughter. You lost that right when you let us struggle alone. I didn't know. You didn't care enough to know. The accusation hung between them, and Theodore realized that no amount of explanation could bridge the chasm of her childhood pain. She'd survived abandonment, trauma, neglect, and now discovered that her father had been alive and wealthy the entire time, oblivious to her suffering. I care now, he said quietly. I love you now. Love. Zara's voice cracked. You don't even know me. You love the idea of me, the daughter you lost, the guilt you can finally resolve. But you don't know who I really am. Then tell me. Why should I? So you can fix me? Make up for lost time? Ease your conscience. She grabbed her backpack, stuffing her few belongings inside with sharp, angry movements. I've been taking care of myself for 6 years. I don't need a father now. But I need you. The admission stopped her mid-motion. Theodore saw her shoulders shake, saw her fight against tears that wanted to fall. "That's not my problem," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Please don't leave." Theodore stood slowly, careful not to move too quickly, not to spook her further. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I failed you in ways I can't even begin to understand. But I'm asking, no, I'm begging, for the opportunity to try." "Try what?" "To be your father. To give you the home you should have had all along. To prove that some people don't leave." Zara turned to face him, and Theodore saw his own eyes looking back at him, brown and deep and full of a pain that mirrored his own. "People always leave," she whispered. "It's what they do. Not me. Not anymore." They stared at each other across the guest room, two broken people who'd found each other by accident and discovered they'd been missing each other their entire lives. The truth lay between them like a bridge, sturdy enough to cross, but requiring faith that neither of them was sure they possessed. "I need to think," Zara said finally. "Okay. I might leave. I know. And you'll just let me go?" Theodore's heart screamed in protest, but he nodded. "If that's what you choose. But I'll never stop hoping you'll come back." Zara slung her backpack over her shoulder, then paused at the doorway. "The bracelet," she said quietly. "It was yours first, wasn't it? Before you gave it to my mother." Theodore nodded, his throat too tight for words. "She told me it meant forever loved. But forever's a long time when you're 8 years old and everyone keeps leaving." With that, she walked out of the room, leaving Theodore alone with the devastating knowledge that he'd found his daughter only to lose her again, this time to his own failures as a father he'd never had the chance to be. In the hallway, Zara pressed her back against the wall and slid down to the floor, her backpack clutched to her chest. For 14 years, she'd wondered about her father. Now she knew the truth, and it hurt worse than not knowing at all. She had a choice to make: run from this man who'd unknowingly failed her, or stay and risk being disappointed again by someone she was already starting to love. Either way, her heart was going to break. Dawn came slowly to Manhattan, painting Theodore's penthouse in shades of gold and possibility. He hadn't slept after Zara's revelation, couldn't sleep with the knowledge that his daughter was somewhere in his home, wrestling with the same impossible emotions that were tearing him apart. He found her in the kitchen at 6 a.m., standing at the window with a cup of coffee that was more cream than anything else, watching the city wake up. She changed back into her own clothes, jeans with carefully patched holes, a sweatshirt that had seen better years, sneakers that were holding together through determination alone. Her backpack sat by the door, packed and ready. "You're leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. "I thought about it." Zara didn't turn around, her reflection ghost-like in the window glass. "All night, I thought about it." Theodore poured himself coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. And I realized something." She finally turned to face him, and he was struck again by how much she looked like Catherine, but also like him, in the stubborn set of her jaw and the way she held herself when she was fighting for something important. "I've been running from homes my whole life. Maybe it's time I ran toward one instead." Hope flickered in Theodore's chest, dangerous and fragile. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to try." Zara's voice was careful, measured. "Not because you're my biological father, or because you have money, or because I don't have anywhere else to go. But because yesterday, before we knew any of this, you looked at me and saw someone worth saving. You are worth saving. So are you." The simple statement hit Theodore harder than any of the anger or accusations from the night before. He'd spent 3 years believing he was broken beyond repair, that the best parts of himself had died with his daughter's disappearance. But here was Zara, offering him something he'd forgotten how to accept: forgiveness. "I don't know how to be a father," he admitted. "I had 11 years with you before, and I thought I was figuring it out. But this, starting over when you're 14 and you've already raised yourself. I don't have a manual for this. Good thing I don't need a manual, father." Zara moved closer, her coffee cup warming her hands. I need someone who won't give up on me when things get complicated. Things are already complicated. Yeah. She smiled for the first time since learning the truth, small but real. But maybe complicated is better than empty. Theodore felt tears threatening, the kind he trained himself not to shed, the kind that came with hope instead of grief. What do we do now? I guess we figure it out as we go. Zara shrugged, the gesture so achingly familiar that Theodore's heart stuttered. She'd done the same thing as a little girl when faced with something new and uncertain. But first, I think you owe me some stories. Stories. About my mom. About you too. About me before. Her voice grew quieter. I only have 8 years of memories with her, and most of them are about struggling to survive. I want to know what she was like when she was happy. Theodore nodded, understanding the gift she was offering him, the chance to share the past instead of being haunted by it. They settled on the couch in his living room, the morning light streaming through the windows and turning everything golden. Theodore pulled out his phone and scrolled to a folder he hadn't opened in years, photos from his brief but intense relationship with Catherine Blackwood. This was your mother at the Met, he said, showing Zara a picture of Catherine laughing at something off camera, her hair caught by wind and her eyes bright with joy. She insisted on seeing every painting in the entire museum. Took us 6 hours. Zara studied the photo with hungry eyes. She looks so young. 23. We met at a gallery opening. She was working for the catering company, and I was there for business. She spilled wine on my suit, and instead of apologizing, she told me the stain looked like abstract art and I should embrace it. That sounds like her. Zara's smile was soft, nostalgic. She used to say that mistakes were just life being creative. She had this way of seeing beauty in everything. Broken things, discarded things, things other people would overlook. Theodore swiped to another photo. Catherine feeding pigeons in Central Park, completely absorbed in the simple pleasure of it. I'd never met anyone like her. What happened? Between you two, I mean. Theodore was quiet for a long moment, remembering the intensity of those 6 months and the fear that had ultimately driven him away. I was 37, focused on building my company. Your mother was this force of nature who made me want things I'd never considered, a family, a different kind of life. It scared me. He looked at Zara, seeing forgiveness in her expression instead of judgment. I told myself we were too different, that it wouldn't work long term. So I ended it. Did you love her? Yes. More than I'd ever loved anyone. The admission came easily, surprising him with its truth. But I was a coward. I chose the safe, predictable path instead of taking a chance on something real. Zara absorbed this, turning the information over in her mind. She never said she loved you. But she kept the bracelet. And she gave me your last name, even though you weren't there. She did. Zara Catherine Blackwood. That's what's on my birth certificate. Zara's voice was thoughtful. The social workers changed it to Williams when I entered the system, but legally, I'm still a Blackwood. Theodore felt something shift inside his chest, not the dangerous flutter of his heart attack, but the deep, settling sensation of pieces falling into place. Can I show you something? He asked. He led her down the hallway to a room he hadn't opened in 3 years. His hand hesitated on the doorknob, muscle memory reminding him of the pain that waited behind this particular door. I kept it exactly the same, he said as he pushed the door open. In case you ever. Zara gasped. The room was a shrine to childhood. Pink walls covered with crayon drawings, a canopy bed with stuffed animals arranged just so, bookshelves lined with picture books and chapter books and the beginnings of a young adult collection. It was the room of a girl who'd been deeply loved, treasured, encouraged to dream big and reach high. This was mine. Zara whispered, stepping inside like she was entering a museum. Every toy, every book, every drawing on the wall. Theodore stayed in the doorway, giving her space to explore. You loved horses and dinosaurs equally. You insisted on painting your walls pink, but only if we could add glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Zara looked up, and sure enough, hundreds of tiny stars dotted the pink ceiling, waiting for darkness to reveal their magic. I used to read to you every night, Theodore continued, his voice thick with memory. You had this way of asking what happens next, even after I'd finished the story. Like you couldn't believe the adventure was really over. Zara picked up a stuffed elephant from the bed, gray and worn soft from years of love. Mr. Peanuts, she said, the name coming from some deep place in her memory. You named him that because you said his trunk looked like a peanut. Theodore stepped into the room, drawn by the wonder in his daughter's voice. He went everywhere with you. The park, grocery store, doctor's appointments. Your mother used to say he was your security blanket. I remember him. Zara hugged the elephant to her chest, and for a moment she looked exactly like the 11-year-old who disappeared from a playground. I remember this room. The stars, the books, the way it smelled like lavender because you used that fancy detergent. You remember? Pieces. Fragments. She moved to the bookshelf, running her fingers along familiar spines. I remember you reading Charlotte's Web, and how I cried when Charlotte died. And I remember feeling safe here. The words hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. You were safe here, Theodore said. And you are safe here. This is still your room, Zara. It's always been your room. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks, not the angry tears from the night before, but the cleansing kind that came with recognition and release. I thought you didn't want me, she whispered. All these years, I thought you knew about me and just didn't care. I wanted you so much I nearly lost my mind looking for you. Theodore crossed the room, and for the first time since the subway, he reached out to touch his daughter's face, wiping away her tears with gentle thumbs. I never stopped wanting you. I never stopped loving you. Even though I'm not the same person who lived in this room. You're exactly the same person, brave and kind and stubborn as hell. You just grew up too fast without me there to slow down time. Zara leaned into his touch, this man who was a stranger and her father all at once. I don't know how to do this. How to be your daughter again. We'll figure it out together. Theodore pulled her into a hug that was 6 years overdue, feeling her slight frame against his chest and marveling at how perfectly she still fit in his arms. We have time now. All the time in the world. They stood in the pink room with its glow-in-the-dark stars, holding on to each other and the fragile hope that some broken things could be mended, some lost things could be found, some loves could survive even the longest separations. For the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. Dad. Zara's voice was muffled against his shoulder. The word hit Theodore like a miracle. Yeah. Can we have pancakes for breakfast? I remember you making really terrible pancakes. Theodore laughed, the first real laugh he'd had in 3 years. They weren't terrible. They were artistically shaped. They were terrible, Zara said, but she was laughing too. But I want them anyway. Terrible pancakes it is. As they headed toward the kitchen, Zara paused at the threshold of her childhood room. Dad. Thank you. For keeping it the same. For believing I'd come home. You are home, sweetheart. Finally, you're home. What does coming home really mean to you? Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship that was broken by circumstances beyond your control? Share your thoughts about second chances and family below. The pancakes were, in fact, terrible. Lopsided, slightly burned, and shaped like nothing identifiable in nature. But they tasted like belonging, and for 3 perfect hours, Theodore and Zara existed in a bubble where fairy tales came true and lost daughters found their way home. The bubble burst at 11:47 a.m. with a knock on the door. Theodore wasn't expecting anyone. His calendar had been cleared for recovery, his assistant instructed to handle everything remotely. But the knock came again, more insistent, accompanied by voices in the hallway. "Mr. Blackwood? This is Detective Martinez, with Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you." Zara's face went white. She knew that tone, knew what those words meant. She'd heard them before, standing in foster homes while social workers discussed her future like she wasn't in the room. "What's happening?" she whispered, but Theodore was already moving toward the door, his expression shifting from confusion to something that looked like guilt. "Mr. Blackwood?" The voice came again. "We know you're in there. We have reports of a minor staying in your residence without proper guardianship documentation." Theodore's hand froze on the doorknob. Behind him, he could hear Zara's sharp intake of breath, the sound of someone who'd learned to recognize the footsteps of abandonment. "You called them," she said, her voice flat with realization. "You called social services." "No, I. Don't lie to me." Zara was backing away from him, her body coiled for flight. "You called them because you realized what a mess this is. Rich man with a homeless teenager, no legal documentation, no proof of relationship." "Zara, that's not what happened." "Then who called them?" Theodore's silence was answer enough. The truth was, he'd made a call the night before, after Zara's revelation, after the shock had worn off and the reality of their situation had set in. But it hadn't been to get rid of her, it had been to protect her. "I called my lawyer," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "To ask about adoption procedures. Legal guardianship. How to make this official so no one could ever take you away from me again. Mr. Blackwood, we're coming in." The sound of keys in the lock, master keys that building management had provided to authorities. Zara's eyes blazed with betrayal. "You couldn't even wait a day? Couldn't trust me enough to talk to me first? I was trying to protect you. By going behind my back? By treating me like a problem to be solved instead of a person who might have opinions about her own life." The door opened, and suddenly the penthouse was full of strangers. Detective Martinez, whom Theodore recognized from 3 years of painful meetings about his missing daughter, 2 social workers with clipboards and grim expressions, and someone in a suit who introduced himself as a family court representative. "Mr. Blackwood." Detective Martinez looked older, more tired than Theodore remembered. "We received a call from your attorney requesting information about expedited adoption procedures for a minor currently in your custody. Given your history with missing children, we felt obligated to investigate." The words hit like a slap. Theodore saw his own shame reflected in Zara's eyes, the realization that his past searches for her could now be twisted into something sinister, something that painted him as a man with unhealthy interest in vulnerable children. "This is my daughter," Theodore said desperately. "Zara Blackwood. She's been missing for 3 years, and I just found her." "Mr. Blackwood," one of the social workers interrupted, consulting her tablet. "Our records show no missing person reports for any Zara Blackwood matching this young lady's description. We do, however, have extensive documentation for Zara Williams, a ward of the state who left her most recent placement 3 days ago." "That's because," Theodore started, but Zara cut him off. "Because the system screwed up," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "Because when my mother died and I went into foster care, they changed my name and lost track of who I really was. Because bureaucrats made mistakes that kept a father and daughter apart for 6 years." "Miss Williams," the second social worker said gently, "we understand this is confusing, but we have protocols to follow. Unsubstantiated claims of family relationships, especially involving wealthy individuals and vulnerable minors." "Unsubstantiated." Zara's voice cracked. "You want proof?" "He knew about the bracelet my mother gave me. He has pictures of her. He kept my room exactly the same for 3 years hoping I'd come home. He knows I named my stuffed elephant Mr. Peanuts and that I cried when Charlotte died in the book he used to read to me." Detective Martinez was taking notes, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Williams, many details about missing children become public knowledge. without DNA evidence or legal documentation. Then test our DNA, Theodore said firmly. Right now. Today. Whatever you need to prove she's my daughter. That will take several days to process, the family court representative said. In the meantime, Miss Williams needs to be placed in protective custody while we investigate these claims. No. The word came out of Zara like a gunshot. I won't go back into the system. Miss Williams, I understand this is frightening, but you don't understand anything. Zara was backing toward her old bedroom, her survival instincts kicking in. You people have been shuffling me around for 6 years, losing paperwork, making mistakes, treating me like a burden. And now you want to take me away from the one person who actually wants me. Zara, Theodore stepped toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. And you. Her voice was raw with pain. You promised you wouldn't leave. You said you'd never stop fighting for me. But the first chance you got, you called lawyers and brought the system back into our lives. I was trying to make it legal. You were trying to control it. To manage it like one of your business deals instead of trusting that we could figure it out together. Theodore felt his world cracking apart. He could see the fear in Zara's eyes, the way she was calculating distances to exits and windows, her body remembering every time she'd been taken from a place she'd started to call home. Miss Williams, Detective Martinez said, his voice gentler now, no one wants to hurt you. But we have to follow procedure. There are laws designed to protect children. Protect me from what? From having a father who loves me? From finally being wanted somewhere? Zara's voice broke. The only thing I need protection from is a system that's been failing me my entire life. Zara, please. Theodore's voice was desperate. Don't run. Stay and fight this with me. We'll prove you're my daughter, we'll make it legal, we'll what? Hope they don't decide you're an unfit parent because you're rich and single and once had a daughter who went missing? Hope they don't decide I'm too damaged from the system to be worth saving. Zara shook her head. I've learned not to hope for things I can't control. She was at her bedroom door now, her hand on the handle. You know what the difference is between you and every other adult who's disappointed me? What? I actually believed you when you said you wouldn't leave. The words hit Theodore like a physical blow. He watched his daughter, the girl he'd searched for, prayed for, mourned for, look at him with the same expression she'd worn that first day in a hospital, like someone who'd learned not to count on anyone. The difference is, Zara continued, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, this time it actually breaks my heart. She disappeared into her room, and Theodore heard the lock click. A moment later, the sound of a window opening. Miss Williams. The social workers rushed toward the bedroom, but Theodore was faster. He found the room empty, the window open to the fire escape, a note on the bed written in the same purple crayon she'd used as a child. Asterisk, Dad, I know you were trying to help. But I can't lose another family to people who think they know what's best for me. Find me when you figure out how to fight the system instead of working with it. I'll be waiting. Z***. Theodore looked out the window and saw her, a small figure descending the fire escape with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to run before she'd learned to trust. Mr. Blackwood, Detective Martinez was behind him. We need to discuss. Get out. Theodore's voice was deadly quiet. Sir, we have procedures. Get out. The roar came from somewhere deep in Theodore's chest, from the part of him that had lost his daughter once to bureaucratic failures and wasn't about to lose her again. All of you, get out of my home before I call my lawyers and bury you in lawsuits. Mr. Blackwood, threatening law enforcement. Isn't a threat. It's a promise. Theodore turned to face them, and Detective Martinez saw something in his eyes that made him step back. You've taken my daughter from me twice now. Once through incompetence, and now through bureaucratic zealotry. But this time, I know she's alive. This time, I know where to look. Sir, if you attempt to interfere with a child protection investigation, then arrest me. But understand that I have enough money to make your lives very complicated and enough connections to make sure every mistake you've made in this case becomes front-page news. The officials exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that they'd walked into something bigger and more complex than a simple custody situation. We'll be in touch, the family court representative said finally. As they filed out, Detective Martinez paused at the door. For what it's worth, Mr. Blackwood, I hope she really is your daughter. And I hope you find her. I will, Theodore said. This time I will. Alone in his penthouse, Theodore stood in his daughter's empty room and felt the familiar ache of loss settle back into his chest. But this time was different. This time, he knew Zara was out there somewhere, and more importantly, he knew she was waiting for him to prove he could be the father she needed. Not the one the system would approve of, but the one who would fight for her no matter what. The terrible pancakes sat cold on the kitchen table, a reminder of the perfect morning that had shattered so completely. But Theodore wasn't mourning this time. He was planning. Because some things were worth fighting the whole world for. And his daughter was definitely one of them. The rain started at midnight, turning Manhattan into a maze of reflections and shadows. Theodore stood at his office window 37 floors above the city, watching water streak down the glass like tears. He'd been there for 6 hours, making calls, pulling strings, doing what he did best, wielding power and money like weapons against a system that had failed his daughter twice. But power, he was learning, had limits when it came to matters of the heart. Sir. His lawyer, David Chun, appeared in the doorway with another stack of documents. I've got the emergency custody petition ready, character references from 12 board members, and statements from your household staff confirming Zara's presence in your home. Theodore didn't turn from the window. Any word from the private investigators? 3 possible sightings. 1 at Port Authority, 1 near the Queensboro Bridge, 1 at a youth shelter in Brooklyn. But she's smart, Mr. Blackwood. She knows how to disappear. She learned that in foster care, Theodore said quietly. How to run when adults make decisions about her life without including her in the conversation. David shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I have to ask again. Are you sure we shouldn't work with Child Protective Services? If you really believe she's your daughter. She is my daughter. Theodore's voice was steel. DNA test or no DNA test, birth certificate or no birth certificate, she is my child. And I failed her once by trusting the system to protect her. I won't make that mistake again. Theodore's phone buzzed. Another investigator, another dead end. Zara had vanished into the city as completely as if the earth had swallowed her whole. There's something else, David said hesitantly. Detective Martinez called. They're prepared to drop the investigation if you voluntarily surrender any claim to custody and allow them to find appropriate placement for Zara. Absolutely not. Theodore, be practical. You're fighting the entire state bureaucracy. Even with your resources, this could take months. Years. And in the meantime, she's out there alone. She's out there because I broke her trust. Theodore finally turned from the window, and David was startled by the raw pain in his eyes. She's out there because when push came to shove, I chose the safe legal path instead of protecting what we built together. You were trying to make it official. I was trying to control it. Just like I tried to control everything else in my life after Catherine died. Theodore slumped into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 52 years. Do you know what Zara said to me yesterday morning? She said she wanted to try running toward a home instead of away from one. And what did I do? I immediately started building legal barriers around that home instead of trusting that love might be enough. David was quiet for a moment. So what do you want to do? Theodore looked at the stack of legal documents, the emergency petitions, the character references from people who barely knew him personally but could vouch for his net worth. All of it felt hollow, meaningless. I want to stop fighting the system, he said finally, and start fighting for her. 3 miles away, in a 24-hour diner in Queens that smelled like coffee and broken dreams, Zara sat in a corner booth with a cup of hot chocolate she couldn't afford and a notebook she'd stolen from a pharmacy. She'd been writing for hours, letters to Theodore that she'd never send, memories of her mother that she didn't want to forget, a list of all the ways adults had disappointed her over the years. But mostly, she'd been thinking about the look on Theodore's face when she'd accused him of giving up on her. The way his whole body had crumpled, like she'd delivered a physical blow. You gonna order something or just nurse that cocoa all night? The waitress, Dolores, according to her name tag, had kind eyes and the tired posture of someone working her second job. I'm sorry, I can pay. Honey, I wasn't trying to kick you out. Just wondering if you're okay. It's past 2 a.m., and you look like you've been crying. Zara touched her face, surprised to find it wet. She'd been so lost in thought she hadn't realized she was crying. I'm fine, she said automatically. Aha. Dolores slid into the booth across from her. I got 5 kids of my own, sweetie. I know fine when I see it, and this ain't it. There was something about Dolores, maybe the maternal warmth that Zara had been missing for 6 years, maybe just the exhaustion of being alone with her thoughts, that made the words tumble out. I found my dad, Zara said quietly. My real dad. After all these years thinking he'd abandoned me, I found out he'd been looking for me the whole time. That's wonderful, honey. Yeah, it was. For about 12 hours. Zara's laugh was bitter. Then he did exactly what every other adult in my life has done. He tried to fix the situation instead of trusting me to help figure it out. Dolores listened as Zara told her about the social workers, the legal complications, the way Theodore's face had looked when he'd realized what his phone call had set in motion. Sounds like he made a mistake, Dolores said when Zara finished. A big one. Sounds like he loves you too. Zara looked up sharply. How can you tell? Because you're sitting here crying over disappointing him instead of celebrating your escape. Dolores smiled gently. Because when you talk about him, even when you're angry, your whole face lights up. That's not resentment, honey. That's love. Love isn't enough, Zara said, but her voice lacked conviction. Love is the only thing that's enough. Everything else, money, security, legal documents, that's just window dressing. Dolores leaned forward. But love requires courage. From both people. The courage to trust even when you've been hurt before. What if he hurts me again? What if he doesn't? The question hung in the air between them. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean for another day of possibilities. Zara's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Zara, this is your dad. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I'm not asking you to come home. I'm asking you to meet me somewhere public, somewhere safe, so I can tell you what I should have said this morning. The carousel in Central Park. Where I used to take you when you were little. I'll wait there every day at sunset until you're ready to listen. No lawyers, no social workers, no system. Just us. Dad. Zara stared at the message, her heart racing. She could ignore it, disappear completely, start over somewhere new. She'd done it before. She was good at running. Or she could choose courage. What are you thinking, honey? Dolores asked gently. I'm thinking, Zara said slowly, that maybe it's time to stop running away from the possibility of being hurt and start running toward the possibility of being loved. She looked out at the rain-soaked city, thinking about a man who'd kept her room exactly the same for 3 years, who'd made terrible pancakes with tears in his eyes, who'd looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd never dared to voice. Thank you, she said to Dolores, leaving a $5 bill on the table, money she couldn't spare but giving anyway because kindness deserved to be rewarded. Where you going, honey? Home, Zara said, and for the first time in her life, she knew exactly what that word meant. Theodore had been sitting on the bench by the Central Park carousel for 4 hours when she appeared. He'd brought an umbrella but hadn't bothered to open it, letting the rain soak through his expensive suit like penance. He almost didn't recognize her at first. She'd pulled her hood up against the weather, and she approached slowly, cautiously, like someone who'd learned not to trust in happy endings. But when she pulled the hood back, revealing those familiar brown eyes and that stubborn chin, Theodore's heart nearly stopped. "You came," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I came," Zara agreed, settling onto the bench beside him but maintaining careful distance. "But I'm not staying unless you can promise me something. Anything. Promise me that from now on, when decisions need to be made about my life, I get a vote. That you won't try to protect me by going around me or over me or through me, but with me." Theodore turned to face her fully. "I promise. And promise me that if this gets complicated, when it gets complicated, you won't take the easy way out. You won't decide it's too hard or too messy or too risky and hand me back to the system." "Zara." Theodore's voice broke. "I spent 3 years searching for you. 3 years hoping and praying and refusing to give up even when everyone told me you were probably dead. Do you really think I'm going to give up on you now that I know you're alive?" "People give up on me," she said simply. "It's what they do. Not me. Not ever again." Theodore reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "I've spent the last 6 hours firing lawyers and canceling petitions and withdrawing every legal action I started. No more working with the system. No more trying to make this easy or official or convenient." "What does that mean?" "It means we do this the hard way. We prove you're my daughter through DNA testing, but we do it privately. We establish your identity through school records and medical files and whatever else we can dig up. We fight the bureaucracy if we have to, but we fight it together." Zara studied his face, looking for signs of doubt or reservation. "That could take months. Years. And there's no guarantee it'll work. I don't care how long it takes. You could get in trouble. Legal trouble, for harboring a runaway. Let them try to prosecute a father for protecting his daughter. The social workers will keep coming. Then we'll keep proving them wrong." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the carousel horses rise and fall in their eternal dance, listening to the mechanical music that had provided the soundtrack to Zara's childhood visits to this park. "I remember this place," Zara said quietly. "I remember you lifting me onto the white horse with the pink saddle because I was too small to climb up myself." "You always wanted the white horse," Theodore said, smiling at the memory. "You said it looked like it was flying." "I remember feeling like I was flying." Zara's voice was wistful. "Like nothing bad could ever happen as long as you were there to catch me if I fell." "I'm here now," Theodore said. "And I'll catch you if you fall. Every time, for as long as you'll let me." Zara looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd given up everything safe and legal and easy to fight for her. This man who'd sat in the rain for hours just hoping she'd show up. This man who was willing to take on the entire system for the chance to be her father. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. Okay, let's go home. Let's do this the hard way. Let's fight for us." Theodore felt tears mixing with the rain on his face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Zara stood and held out her hand to him. "Besides, someone has to teach you how to make proper pancakes." Theodore took her hand, feeling the warmth and strength of it, marveling at how something so simple could feel like coming back to life. "Deal," he said. "But I warn you, I'm a terrible student. Good thing I'm a patient teacher." As they walked away from the carousel together, Zara looked back once at the spinning horses. She'd spent her whole life running from one temporary situation to another, never quite believing in forever. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't running away from something. She was running toward it. And for the first time in her life, forever felt possible. 6 months later. The DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday morning in April, sealed in an envelope that contained the power to change everything or confirm what their hearts had known all along. Theodore found it slipped under his office door with the morning mail, his name written in official typeface that seemed too sterile for something so monumentally important. But he didn't open it. Instead, he tucked the envelope into his jacket pocket and headed home to the penthouse where Zara was probably burning breakfast and cursing at her chemistry homework, a morning routine that had become as precious to him as breathing. He found her exactly where he'd expected, in the kitchen, standing over a smoking pan of what had once been scrambled eggs, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and his oversized Columbia University sweatshirt hanging off her slight frame. "Don't say it," she warned without turning around. "I know I'm terrible at this." "I wasn't going to say anything," Theodore lied, kissing the top of her head as he reached around her to turn off the burner. "Although I do think the eggs are trying to send us a message." "Yeah, the message is order takeout." It had taken weeks to reach this easy domesticity, this casual affection that felt both new and ancient. Weeks of careful conversations and tentative trusts, of learning each other's rhythms and boundaries. Weeks of Zara testing whether he'd really stay when things got difficult, and Theodore proving over and over that some promises were unbreakable. The social workers had come 3 more times, armed with court orders and concerned expressions. Each time, Theodore had met them with his own lawyers, not to steamroll the system anymore, but to work within it properly. Each time, Zara had stood beside him, no longer the frightened girl ready to run, but a young woman who'd learned to fight for what mattered. "Speaking of messages," Theodore said, pulling the envelope from his pocket. "This came this morning." Zara went very still, her hand frozen halfway to the paper towel dispenser. She recognized the return address, the official seal, the weight of what that envelope contained. "The DNA results," she said quietly. "Yeah." They'd submitted the samples 3 months ago, after Dr. Patel had connected them with a geneticist who specialized in family reunification cases. The process had been thorough, official, designed to produce results that would satisfy even the most skeptical social worker. But somewhere along the way, the test had stopped being about proving their relationship to the world and started being about proving it to themselves. "Are you nervous?" Zara asked. "Terrified," Theodore admitted. "Which is crazy, because I know you're my daughter. I've known it since that first day in the hospital. But there's this tiny part of my brain that keeps whispering, what if? What if the universe is really that cruel? What if we found each other by cosmic coincidence instead of cosmic design?" Zara nodded. "I know. I've been having the same thoughts." They stared at the envelope together, this piece of paper that would either confirm their miracle or shatter their world. "You know what?" Zara said suddenly. "I don't want to open it." "What?" "I don't want to open it," she repeated, more firmly this time. "Not yet. Not today." Theodore frowned. "Zara, we need to know. For the legal proceedings, for the adoption paperwork." "Do we?" She turned to face him fully, her eyes bright with sudden certainty. "Do we really need a piece of paper to tell us we're family?" "The law says we do." "The law said I was missing when I was really just lost in the system. The law said you'd abandoned me when you've been searching for me all along. The law has been wrong about us before." Theodore understood what she was saying, but the practical part of him, the part that had spent 6 months fighting bureaucracy, needed the official confirmation. "If we don't open it, and it turns out—" "It won't," Zara interrupted. "And even if it did, would that change anything? Would you love me less if I wasn't biologically your daughter?" The question hit Theodore like a revelation. He thought about the past 6 months, teaching Zara to drive in empty parking lots, helping her with homework he barely understood, staying up all night when she had nightmares about her mother's accident. He thought about the way she laughed at his terrible jokes, the way she rolled her eyes when he worried too much, the way she'd started calling him Dad without even thinking about it. "No," he said quietly. "It wouldn't change anything." "Then let's not open it today. Let's just be a family for one more day without needing permission from anyone else. Theodore looked at his daughter. Legally, biologically, or simply by choice, she was his daughter, and felt something settle in his chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the simple recognition that love didn't need documentation. Okay, he said, tucking the envelope back into his pocket. What do you want to do instead? Finish burning breakfast, obviously. Zara grinned. And then I want you to take me to that bookstore in the village where you used to buy me picture books. I need new reading material for my college applications. College applications? Theodore's eyebrows rose. Since when are you thinking about college? Since I realized I might actually have a future worth planning for. The words were casual, thrown away like an afterthought, but they hit Theodore with the force of a revelation. This girl who'd spent her whole life in survival mode was now thinking about futures, about dreams, about tomorrows that stretched beyond just making it through today. Any idea what you want to study? Social work, maybe. Child advocacy. Something that helps kids who are falling through the cracks like I did. Zara's expression grew thoughtful. I figure if I'm going to be stuck with this experience, I might as well use it to help other people. Theodore felt pride swell in his chest, not just pride in her ambition, but pride in who she was becoming. Despite everything the system had done to her, despite all the ways she'd been failed and forgotten, she wanted to spend her life protecting other children from the same fate. I think that's perfect, he said. Yeah? You won't be disappointed if I don't want to take over Blackwood Industries someday. Sweetheart, I'd be disappointed if you didn't follow your own dreams. They spent the morning at the bookstore, wandering through sections labeled social justice and education policy, Zara collecting armfuls of books while Theodore marveled at the intensity of her focus. She'd approach college applications the same way she'd approached survival, with determination, intelligence, and a refusal to be discouraged by obstacles. Lunch was at the same diner where they'd had their first real conversation as father and daughter, the place where Theodore had told her about Catherine and Zara had shared the story of the bracelet that had started to heal both their hearts. Can I ask you something? Zara said over grilled cheese sandwiches that were infinitely better than anything either of them could make at home. Always. Do you think my mom would be proud of us? Of how we found each other? Theodore considered the question seriously. He thought about Catherine as he'd known her, fierce and independent and absolutely devoted to the daughter she'd raised alone. He thought about the woman who'd kept his bracelet and given their child his name even when he wasn't there to claim either of them. I think, he said carefully, your mother would be amazed that her daughter grew up to be brave enough to save a stranger's life on a subway train. And I think she'd be proud that her daughter chose love over safety when it mattered most. Even though it took us so long to find each other? Especially because it took us so long. Easy things don't teach you what you're made of. Zara smiled, and Theodore saw Catherine in the expression, the same mix of wisdom and mischief that had captured his heart 23 years ago. She loved you, you know, Zara said quietly. Even after you left. Even when things got hard. She never said it out loud, but I could tell. The way she'd look at your picture sometimes when she thought I wasn't watching. She kept a picture? In her jewelry box. You were younger, standing in front of some building with your arms crossed and this serious expression. But you were almost smiling, like you were trying not to. Theodore knew exactly which picture she meant, a corporate headshot from early in his career, back when he'd still believed success was measured in dollars instead of love. I wish I could tell her I'm sorry, he said. For leaving. For missing your childhood. For all of it. You can tell her, Zara said simply. Tonight, when we get home. She might not be able to answer, but that doesn't mean she can't hear you. That evening, as the sun set over Central Park, Theodore found himself standing in front of the small shrine he'd created in his bedroom, a photo of Catherine holding newborn Zara, surrounded by flowers that Zara refreshed every week. I found her, he said quietly to the photograph. Our daughter. She's incredible, Catherine. She's brave and smart and stubborn as hell, just like you were. She saved my life, literally and figuratively. And somehow, despite everything I did wrong, despite all the ways the system failed her, she chose to love me anyway." He paused, touching the glass that protected Catherine's image. "I know I don't deserve her forgiveness. I know I can't undo the years she spent alone, the pain she endured because I wasn't there to protect her. But I promise you, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she knows she's loved. That she's safe. That she matters. She already knows." Theodore turned to find Zara in the doorway, the DNA test envelope in her hands. "I've been thinking about this all day," she said, holding up the envelope. "And I realized something. It doesn't matter what this says. What matters is that we chose each other. Biology is just chance, but choice is love." "Are you saying you want to open it?" "I'm saying I want to open it together. And then I want to frame it and put it on the mantle, not because we need proof that we're family, but because it's part of our story. The story of how a lost girl and a broken man found each other on a subway train and decided to build something beautiful out of all that pain." Theodore took the envelope from her hands, his fingers trembling slightly as he opened it. They read the results together, standing in the golden light of sunset streaming through the bedroom windows. 99.99% probability of paternal relationship confirmed. "Well," Zara said after a moment of silence, "that's anticlimactic." Theodore laughed, the deep, joyful sound of a man who'd learned to believe in happy endings again. "Were you expecting fireworks? Maybe a little confetti. Some dramatic music?" Zara grinned. "Instead, it's just Tuesday afternoon, and we're still the same people we were this morning. The same people who happen to be officially, legally, scientifically father and daughter. The same people who were already father and daughter the moment we chose to be." Theodore pulled her into a hug, marveling again at how perfectly she fit against his chest, how right this felt. "I love you," he said into her hair. "My daughter. My miracle. My second chance at getting it right. I love you too, Dad. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for not giving up on us." They stood there as the sun set over Manhattan, two people who'd found their way home to each other through loss and hope and the simple radical act of refusing to stop believing in love. Later that night, as Theodore tucked Zara into the bed in her pink room with its glow-in-the-dark stars, she reached for the stuffed elephant that had waited faithfully for her return. "Dad." "Yeah, sweetheart. Tomorrow, can we go to the subway station where we met? I want to leave flowers for all the other lost kids out there. I want them to know someone's thinking about them." Theodore's throat tightened with emotion. Even after everything she'd endured, his daughter's first instinct was to care for others who were still suffering. "Of course we can. And after that, can we start working on the adoption paperwork? I know we have the DNA results now, but I want it to be official. I want my name to be Zara Catherine Blackwood again. Legally and forever." "Forever," Theodore agreed, kissing her forehead. "Forever and always." As he turned off the lights, the glow-in-the-dark stars began to shine on the ceiling, hundreds of tiny points of light in the darkness, a reminder that some things are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in even when the odds seem impossible. And in the soft starlight, Zara Catherine Blackwood fell asleep in her father's house, finally and truly home. The next morning, they would return to the subway platform where their story began. They would leave flowers and hope, and Theodore would whisper the words he'd carried in his heart for 6 long years. She gripped the edge of his cart with trembling fingers, her voice barely louder than the mall's hum. "Daddy." And in that instant, everything he had buried came rushing back. But this time, the rushing back wouldn't be just memory and grief. It would be love, recognition, and the beginning of forever. Because some endings are really beginnings in disguise. And some love is strong enough to survive anything, even time. Thank you for following Zara and Theodore's journey from strangers to family. Their story reminds us that love doesn't always arrive on schedule, but it always arrives right on time. What did their story teach you about second chances, chosen family, and the power of never giving up on the people who matter most? Thank you for joining this journey of discovery, redemption, and the bridges we build to connect across the divides that separate us. Share your thoughts about second chances and the hidden gifts of the people around us. We'd love to hear your stories of unexpected connections that changed everything. Please like, subscribe and share because every story of choosing love over fear matters. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. We have plenty of other fascinating and inspiring stories waiting for you, so just click on the image on your screen to watch the next.